Welcome, I'm David Muir. Tonight, we're taking a closer look at a major shift unfolding in the Baltic region, one that's reshaping security, infrastructure, and independence. Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania are rethinking the old Soviet-era systems that once tied them closely to Russia, and choosing instead to build modern, European-aligned networks designed for a safer future. It's a story of resilience, strategy, and nations preparing for a new era on their own terms. Reconsidering rail links in a changing geopolitical landscape. Latvia's conversations about modifying or decommissioning parts of its rail network cannot be understood as isolated transportation decisions. Instead, they are part of a broader rethinking of how the country connects to both its neighbors and the wider European system. Historically, Latvia's railways were built with the broader Soviet military and industrial system in mind, not the needs of a modern independent state. Because the rail gauge differs from the European standard, upgrading or restructuring these lines requires major investments and long-term planning. As Latvian officials discuss the future of these routes, they point not only to economic factors such as declining cross-border freight, but also to national resilience and infrastructure modernization. The notion that railway changes are meant to paralyze another country oversimplifies the issue. Instead, Latvian policymakers emphasize that decisions about domestic transport must reflect current realities rather than the geopolitical assumptions of the 20th century. Understanding Russia's historical reliance on railway logistics, analysts often note that Russia's military and logistics systems traditionally rely heavily on rail transport. This reliance stems from Russia's vast geography and decades-old doctrine that treats railways as the most efficient means of moving heavy equipment and supplies across long distances. However, this characteristic is not unique to Russia. Many large countries use rail networks for heavy logistics. The more important point for Baltic states is whether their own infrastructure leaves them vulnerable to outside influence. When observers describe the possibility of railway restructuring in Latvia as a form of strategic pressure, it is essential to clarify that Latvia's motivations revolve around its own security planning rather than attempts to harm another state's capabilities. Railway decisions made within Latvia's borders fall fully within its sovereignty and are shaped by practical considerations such as maintenance costs, modernization goals, and alignment with European systems. Regional coordination, how Baltic governments align their infrastructure plans. The three Baltic states have increasingly coordinated their infrastructure strategies over the past decade, particularly through large projects such as Rail Baltica, a modern European gauge line running north to south from Poland through Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. This project aims to integrate the region more closely with the rest of Europe, promote economic growth, and ensure that cross-border transport does not depend solely on east-west routes built during the Soviet period. As part of this process, Baltic governments sometimes phase out or repurpose older lines that no longer serve current needs. Such decisions are based on financial and practical evaluations rather than geopolitical provocation. Coordination between Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania is driven by shared goals, improving connectivity, adopting EU standards, and reinforcing regional stability in a predictable and transparent way that avoids escalating tensions. The debate around Kaliningrad and regional supply routes. Kaliningrad, a Russian exclave between Lithuania and Poland, inevitably enters any discussion about regional transport routes. Because Kaliningrad depends on transit through neighboring states for some of its supplies, changes to regional infrastructure can affect the logistical landscape. However, it is important to distinguish between legal, transparent transport regulations and politically motivated disruptions. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia operate within the framework of European Union rules and international agreements. Any adjustments they make to cargo transit or energy flow must adhere to EU regulations, safety requirements, and national legislation. While analysts often highlight how infrastructure changes might complicate supply routes to Kaliningrad, Baltic governments consistently assert that their decisions are driven by national planning, economic viability, and regulatory compliance rather than attempts to isolate or destabilize the region. Energy independence, ending the Soviet-era electrical umbilical cord. If there is one area where the Baltic states have deliberately pursued distance from Russia, it is energy. For decades after restoring independence, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia remained synchronized with the Russian-controlled BRELL electrical grid. This arrangement helped keep electricity flowing but also left the region dependent on external operators who could theoretically disrupt supply during political disputes. Over time, Baltic leaders concluded that long-term energy security required synchronization with the European grid. Achieving this goal took years of planning, negotiations, and infrastructure upgrades. When the Baltics conducted test disconnections and later synchronized with continental Europe, the move was widely viewed not as hostility, but as a strategic milestone, symbolizing full integration into the European energy network and reducing one of the last remnants of post-Soviet dependence. The process focused on stability, transparency, and ensuring that citizens could rely on secure and diversified energy sources. Border security and managing hybrid threats. Alongside infrastructure reforms, the Baltic states have strengthened their border management systems in response to broader regional tensions and concerns about hybrid threats. Countries such as Latvia and Estonia have enhanced surveillance, improved crossing infrastructure, and taken steps to manage potential migration pressures that could be exploited for political leverage. These measures are designed to maintain order at borders and ensure that crossings remain safe and regulated during periods of heightened geopolitical strain. By improving physical barriers, updating border protocols, and coordinating closely with European partners, the Baltics aim to prevent destabilizing activities while avoiding unnecessary escalation. The emphasis remains on law enforcement, border integrity, and adherence to international norms rather than military confrontation. The social dimension, integration, and community stability. One of the less discussed but critically important aspects of Baltic security planning is the social dimension. The region is home to significant populations of Russian-speaking residents, many of whom have lived in the Baltic states for generations. Despite narratives sometimes pushed from outside, surveys consistently show that the vast majority of these residents value stability, economic opportunity, and the protections that come with EU and NATO membership. Baltic governments continue efforts to strengthen social cohesion, expand language education, and promote inclusive civic participation. These policies aim to reduce the risk of external actors using identity issues for political manipulation. By prioritizing integration and community stability, the Baltic states reinforce the internal resilience that underpins national security. How NATO membership shapes strategic planning. The Baltic countries' membership in NATO fundamentally shapes how they assess security challenges and infrastructure decisions. Rather than acting unilaterally or provocatively, they coordinate closely with allies to ensure that any changes to transportation, energy, or border policy contribute to collective defense readiness while avoiding unnecessary confrontation. NATO's presence in the region, including rotational battle groups and joint exercises, provides reassurance that the Baltic states do not need to rely on outdated infrastructure designed for a different era. This shared framework allows them to focus on resilience, modernization, and civil preparedness, trusting that their security commitments with allies provide a stable backdrop for long-term planning. Modern infrastructure as a tool for national resilience. When viewed in context, the Baltic states' infrastructure decisions reflect a broader philosophy. Modernization is a form of security. By developing diversified energy systems, transforming their rail networks, improving border management, and strengthening social cohesion, the Baltics aim to reduce vulnerabilities that could be exploited during crises. This approach does not rely on confrontation or military action. Instead, it emphasizes proactive planning, economic development, and integration with European systems. Infrastructure, in this sense, becomes not a weapon but a foundation supporting stable governance, predictable policies, and long-term regional prosperity. A region building its own future. The evolving strategies of Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania show a region determined to chart its own course. Rather than accepting inherited systems that no longer serve their needs, Baltic governments are designing modern, efficient, and secure networks that align with their vision for the future. These decisions may have geopolitical implications, but they are rooted in sovereignty, legal frameworks, and long-term planning. As the Baltics continue strengthening their connections with Europe and reinforcing their national resilience, they demonstrate that security in the 21st century is as much about infrastructure, integration,